Hello, I'm Victoria,
I'm Rob.
and we've been married 20 years by the time this video comes out. 20 years!
That's pretty crazy. That's a long time.
That's half my life.
I gotta wait till next year for it to be half of my life.
He was 21 and I was 20 when we got married. We've been together 23 years and have had children 17 years.
Well, we've had children for 15.
No,
We
17.
had a child at 17.
Oh my word. We started to have our children over 17 years ago.
Yes.
You have to be so particular. Long ago, we had a podcast.
Long ago.
We recorded a similar video to this, but I no longer have it. We lost it. But it reminds me so much of that. I wish I still had it because then we could go back to it.
Yeah, backtrack to it and see.
It's gone, guys. It's gone. And back then we had asked people questions for us for our marriage and what people wanted to have thoughts about in regards to marriage and minimalism. So I went out again on social media. We did not get as many questions as we once had. The first one is, who is the more affectionate? Me, definitely. I am the more touchy-feely type in general. I like to hold him.
And she's the one that would write letters and little notes and stuff. And,
I mean, you did once in a while.
yeah.
We wrote notes to each other in high school.
Yeah.
By
And there was
hand.
that one time that I wrote the note and left it in her car.
Yes.
A few years ago. I
Ages
forget.
ago now. That was 10 years ago.
Yeah. So.
That's how long it's been. I will say you're affectionate when we're alone. But not in public. He's not affectionate. He's very private. And that's okay.
Yeah.
We were asked, what were your first impressions of each other when you met?
Well, when we met, or
Not when you first saw me. If you want to talk about when you first saw me, you can.
okay, first day of school, my junior year of high school.
My sophomore year.
I went walking down a set of steps, and there she was at the far end of the hallway. It was her first time being at the school. As I recall, everything went into slow motion. I heard Spandau Ballet's True playing.
In his head.
In my head, yes, not in the school. Right away, I was just I need to know that girl. That sort of thing.
But he didn't go up to me.
No.
No.
No, it wasn't for a couple of months, I guess, later.
Well, okay, so my first impression of you before actually meeting you is he was wearing a suit because he listened to a lot of ska music and he was very into that look. I just found that very attractive because you don't see men in suits these days, or those days.
Well, those days.
No,
We're
it's
talking
those
about
days.
20-something years ago now.
But that was our first impression of seeing each other.
I don't know. I don't really remember that, other than when I tried to talk to you one-on-one, I'd kind of hinted at thinking she was cute and whatever, and she told me she didn't date.
I didn't date. He was the first person I dated. My first impression of him was right away, I was I really like him. I want to be his girlfriend. I just wanted to know him and be his friend first. I just felt like a friendship before becoming a couple is important, because if you just say, hey, you're cute, hey, yeah, you're cute, and you get together, I feel like there's nothing to really base your relationship on compared to when you get to know each other and then go okay, we've got some things in common, or these things aren't in common, but you know.
Well, we had actually ended up being friends for almost a year before we started dating finally.
Yeah.
So we had that time, even though we kind of admitted to ourselves at least that we liked each other right away. We did take time to become friends first.
This wasn't really a question. They just said how to grow together versus growing apart. So I guess how are we able to grow together instead of apart?
Communication.
I feel like because we started dating so young, it was easier to grow together because we're learning everything together. We're going through this relationship together. We're adjusting to changes together. So going into adulthood with one another, and we can figure how that works. I feel like communication holds it all together, but I also think we have to be sure to stay committed and try to say, hey, you know what, we're married. We have to try to work on that all the time.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes though young couples can grow up at the same time, not grow together.
Yeah.
So it's still more about the communication, I think, than our age, because there are plenty of older people who start dating later on that, with communication, their relationships are really good too. So
I feel like when you have, like, I don't know what it's like to date, you know, other than you. Like, so I feel like if we were older and we had whatever broken relationships along the way, I think it would be harder for us to be able to grow together because we had already grown apart. So it would be like
grown up apart.
Yeah. So I feel like we'd probably have a harder time later on to try to get to know each other because we have all this baggage that we would have to take into a relationship. And you had a little bit of baggage in past relationships, but he didn't have I didn't not
have
that
any
many
kids. I was never married
Right.
before, you know.
It wasn't crazy. While I had middle school, in-school boyfriends, we never really had anything outside of, so I had no baggage. So you take the fact that people later on, if this is someone that later on became a couple, if they're married or whatever, I think it would be harder for them to grow together. They don't know how to do that, and they have to learn about that. So that's part of the communication, like you said, though.
Well, but I think that the difference when you're an older couple, especially if you're late 20s or older, when you start dating, you are already who you are. You know, we had almost 10 years worth of growing up with each other. You know, there's a different dynamic. Because they say you're not fully established in who you are until you're 25.
Well, your brain is not completely developed by 25. I don't think it's really that you haven't established who you are. I feel like...
Well, I mean, there are definitely people who haven't established themselves by 25.
I think that everyone is always trying to figure out who they are. And when you're
At least you should be.
Right, but then when you're in a marriage, you have to figure that out together. So you have to figure out who you are, and then you have to make sure that they know who you are and who you're becoming, and then they have to be like, okay, well, I'm on this journey with you, and I know who I am, and I'm learning who I am, and so together, it's hard.
Again, ultimately communication. If you don't talk to each other about what's going on...
But how do you
It's not
communicate that?
Talk about what's going on. The things you're dealing with, the things you're thinking about, what you're struggling with, all of those things. Because if you don't communicate that stuff, then you're just not communicating, and that's where you go out of sync with your other if you're not communicating those things. And that's where I think everything starts to fall apart, is when you're out of sync.
This is good segue. How do you overcome communication challenges?
By communicating.
But
don't...
but when you say by communicating, a lot of people are like, what, you just talk? What if the person is trying to cut me off all the time, they don't really want to listen, or they have their own opinion, and then I feel like they're not safe for me to talk. So how do you overcome that? How do we overcome?
If you've gotten to, as far as I'm concerned, if you've gotten to that point where you don't feel comfortable talking to your significant other, it's already too late.
I don't think so.
There has to be a point where if you're dealing with something or you are headed in a direction, you need to be able to just express that and deal with whatever kind of reaction you get. Because they're either going to be with you on it or they're not, and that's just what it is. So what's better, to keep it to yourself or to risk the hurt?
Something that we've talked a lot about is going into marriage, we decided we're going to try to work everything out, even the really, really difficult things. And we've gone through some hard things, and when we've communicated those things, it hasn't been easy because we're trying to process it ourselves. And then to be like, hey, I need to talk to you. This thing is not working out, this thing. And then because we decided that we're going to work on things together, we go, okay, what can we do? What steps can we make? Because otherwise, if you're just like, oh, I can't deal with this, and oh, it's too hard, and then you give up, you take all of that baggage into the next relationship because you haven't dealt with it. So it's better to deal with it together and overcome it, because when you finally overcome it, it becomes easier for you to get through everything, and your marriage becomes better, or your relationship becomes better.
Yep. You agree?
Okay, you have nothing to add to that?
No.
Okay. What is something different you do as a mom or dad than your parents did? Be honest.
This is a weird question to answer, though, for me, because when I was young, my dad spent a lot of time in and out of the hospital. My parents didn't necessarily treat me the way that they would have wanted to, and they told me that. And, and I have accepted that. I didn't grow up the way my parents would have expected to. It's tough for me to say, what do I do differently than my parents do? My parents didn't raise me the way that they would have wanted to, and so it's difficult for me to say this is what I do differently, because I don't have the same circumstances. So pretty much everything about the way that I raise my kids is different from the way that I was raised. You're not paralyzed in and out of the hospital.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to raise my kids the way that my mom or my dad did.
That's true.
So even when I was a kid, we had to move around a lot. I don't think I stayed in any one place for more than 2 years until I got to middle school, which was just 7th and 8th grade. And then I was there 7th, 8th grade, and then all of high school. But all of my younger years, middle school and everything, we moved around a lot. We haven't moved in 16 years. So both of our older boys grew up in the exact same apartment their entire life. You know, this has been their home their entire life. They haven't had to like up and move and rearrange their whole living situation. You know, fortunately for them, they were homeschooled, so it wouldn't have been the same thing anyway. It just would have been a new house. But for me, it was all, you know, whole new set of friends, you know, creating a new set of relationships with people. You know,
so everything is different for him.
Yeah, so there, like, everything is different from the way that my parents raised me. Whether it's my choice or not, that's just, it is.
What about like morally?
Morally? I don't think I've intentionally raised my kids any differently than my parents raised me. I think, again, my parents would have been more strict if they had been able to be more strict.
I don't really think that's true for you, because from what I've heard, you've always been the independent one. And
well, I had to be because
I know, but even
house.
before your dad's illness started,
mm-hmm.
I feel like from what I've heard, your mom kind of let you do whatever you wanted to do.
Well, so that's okay. Well, then that's
which is what we don't do for our kids.
Yeah, I'll say that's one thing that is definitely different about the way that I focus on raising our kids compared to the way my mom did, at least I'll say. We've put restrictions on things that my parents never did.
Yeah.
Like,
well, technology was different too.
Yeah, but
yeah, you didn't
but
have
I had
any,
a computer.
You had
by the
like
time
no
I was,
restrictions.
Yeah, no, not really.
While I was the opposite. I had major restrictions. I had a lot of things I was not allowed to do. I wasn't able to have that independence as much as he did. But I was also raised a lot differently in general than he was, where there were some things that were really good that I was taught, like certain things that I have taken into being a mom. But there are different things that for me that I have not done for my children in the way I was raised.
The way that you are raising our boys is much more similar to the way that your mom raised you
than with
like
your
than
mom.
Me to the way that my mom raised me.
Yeah.
And I say moms because, again, my dad wasn't very involved because
my
of
dad
the
wasn't
wheelchair
involved.
stuff,
My dad wasn't involved with us. They're married still, but he was never really. He didn't really interact with us that much. So I feel like that's a huge difference for how we have raised our kids, is that the father's been very active in their lives and very much a part of their being raised as young men. There are a lot of differences, but there are also like not many differences depending on how you look at it. I think with like the way I clean my house, the hygiene, stuff like that, I raise our boys in the same way I was raised. But when it comes to like minimalism, I was not raised in a minimalistic lifestyle, so that is different, definitely. We were both raised with a lot of clutter around us. That's not how we are. I'm trying to think of what other types of things would be different. Oh, another way is like my family, we were never able to take vacations. We couldn't afford it. So I wanted to make sure that we take little trips here and there, teach our kids about different states and eventually maybe other countries. We've never been outside of the country. My family never really taught me about culture. I made sure to teach about culture to my children. So things like that. Obviously, I homeschooled. My mom didn't homeschool me. There was some violence in my household growing up, which we have never had here.
Yeah, no.
Moving on. Wow, these are like really big questions. Like I thought that they would be like quick answers, but they really take a lot of thought.
Take a little bit of time.
Okay, so this says, not a question, but isn't it so fun being an old married couple? It just gets better.
I'm not complaining.
Like I said, we've gone through some things together. I feel like we're stronger now than ever before because we decided to work through everything. So what I would say is that if you have an early marriage and you find yourself bickering or you have lots of issues with each other, try to find ways to engage one another and try to figure out, listen to them, listen to each other. If you really need to go to therapy, that could help. We've never been to therapy. We have gone through sessions together to try to figure things out. And I think that's been really good. So even though we haven't gone to therapy, we have talked about stuff that I guess in therapy you would talk about.
Like I said, we made the point to communicate. When we came into things where we were going out of sync, we've discussed it and gotten as close back into sync as possible.
And there were times that we could have definitely left each other. And thankfully we didn't. Because if we did, we wouldn't have this little guy, for instance, because we decided we wouldn't have any of our kids really, or we would have maybe one kid. But we worked through everything that was really difficult. In communicating, I feel like we're pretty compatible. Like we're very different personality-wise. I think that our romance is strong.
Yeah.
It helps to be romantic. I love him. See, this is where the affection, and he's like,
and Dane over here is smiling.
He thinks it's cute. Yeah. And our other two, the oldest one thinks it's cute too. The other one's kind of like, oh, there they go again. So I have a question for you. What do you hope for our marriage in 20 more years? Which hopefully we'll make it to. Hopefully we won't die. Hopefully we'll be able to get to 40 years. So what's your hope from like looking back on these 20 years? I could say from like when we first got married, I really didn't think we would be where we are. Like I knew we would be married this long, but I didn't know that we would go through some of the things that we did. And so looking back, I'm like, wow, there were some doozies out there, but I'm really happy and I'm really glad. And so I hope that we won't go through any more doozies along the way, and that everything will just be smooth sailing. I guess the only drama we'll probably have are our children. You want to come here and talk about our marriage, since we've been together, married for 20 years, and you are a product.
About your marriage?
Well, you're a product of 17 years of our 20 years. Would you like to say something about what you think about our marriage? Just briefly? Come into the
seems like
video.
it's been a good marriage.
No, come into the...
Well, you've had a good marriage because I'm okay, and you two are okay.
What are your hopes for looking back?
A better 20 years than the last 20 were.
But it wasn't a bad 20 years.
No, not at all. But like you said, there were some little speed bumps along the way, and hopefully we can avoid those in the next 20.
We've had so much joy with a little bit of pain in between. It's not like throughout our marriage we've had these like crazy things.
It has not been a constant problem.
But again, we worked everything out, and so if you are under 20 years of marriage, I hope you work out everything that goes wrong, and that you see this person on the other side is valuable, your marriage is valuable, your children are valuable. Try to create whatever peace you can in that.
Communicate with each other. That's really what I think is the key to everything. Communication.
And love.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no point in communicating if you don't have love. But
there are people...
People make it work without love. I don't know why. Like...
You don't know why?
I mean, listen, everybody's got their own story. But I just think that if you really want to make it work, communication is the number one thing. Regardless of whatever other circumstances there are.
What do you have to say to people that say that they fell out of love? Do you think that's a true thing? Can you fall out of love?
I don't know. I don't know. I can't put a definitive answer on that. I think that if you fall out of sync, you stop communicating with each other,
then you think
and you start to live your own life, I think that you can fall out of love. You don't see the compatibility.
If you focus enough on, well, they did this, we don't talk enough, why doesn't he do this or she, maybe I don't love them as much, and this person's nice to me, and then you start focusing on, if you're not focusing on your actual marriage, your relationship, and trying to communicate, like he said, saying like, hey, why don't you do this? Is there something going on? Like, how can we make this work? Because I feel like when you shift your focus, you could think that you're out of love. But then when you shift your focus back on the person, you can totally fall more deeply in love. And I feel so many people, they fall out of love because they think that they're not getting the attention that they feel they deserve, or what they should deserve in a marriage. And so it causes people to believe that they're out of love. And I think if you first loved this person, you could continue to love them and grow in that love. And if you feel like there's no spark, what can you do to make that spark come back?
And I don't think it even has to be that the other person is being replaced. I think it's really just if you're not working on the relationship, you don't have to actively court your spouse, but I kind of think of it like our house plants. You know, if I don't water the house plants, they start to die. Now, it doesn't mean I have to be like obsessed with like standing over them, you know, and fertilizing them and making sure that, you know, like the water is the perfect level. Like it doesn't have to be obsessive. If you don't put any effort into it, then yeah, I can imagine it feeling like you're falling out of love, but is that really what it is? Which is why, like I said, I can't say yes or no to whether people can fall out of love, because I think being in love means having a connection with someone. And so if you're not maintaining that connection, then maybe it is that you're falling out of love. But maybe it's just that the definition of being in love is different for people, so that's why that can be different.
There's one thing I want to real quick say is that I've known these like Christian couples, marriages, they say like you have to date every single week with your spouse or it's not going to work, and you have to make sure you have that date night. And they say like it's important to have that date night. And for us, we've barely had date nights, and we didn't really have alone date nights until our kids got much older, and now here we are again. So we always took our boys with us on dates and had like family dates, but we spent time together, like at night, maybe we watch a movie together or something like that. And that's our date nights. We're at home. It doesn't have to be where you go and, you know, we didn't have the money to go on dates. And I feel like that's a lie when you hear people say that. Like, no, you know, you could do something nice. Go for a walk together. So we do that. Go for a picnic. Do something sweet. Just like we'll sit on the porch outside. Just do something nice. You don't have to go like and have a fancy dinner date.
Yeah, it's just working on keeping the line of communication open. You know, we notch out time at night to like sit and watch something together or whatever.
I am glad that we have prioritized one another. Happy anniversary, 20 years. And we probably won't go on a date on our 20th anniversary, but that's okay because we're important and we put each other in that priority spot. If you have any other questions, just leave them in the comments and maybe we'll get to them in the future.
Sure. Okay. Bye.
Bye.